Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I appreciate you being here with me today. And I wanted to say thank you, especially for joining the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm very happy to be here to host this talk, which is going to be done by Brian VOSBERG, who will be leading our live with the theme Be Perfect. If I may, I would like to take a brief moment to make some announcements, Brian. And number one is that
hmm
the United States Spirits Federation is presenting now a podcast like series called Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life, based on the works by Joanna De Angelis. There is a new episode every Friday, and it is at 7 p.m. Eastern. The Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks are based on the works by Joanna De Angelis, as I mentioned, and offers this safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens, bringing insights, actionable tips, and real world advice to help you and I lead a better life. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to receive notifications for those new episodes at USSF YouTube channel. Second announcement, the United States Spiritist Federation is hosting the 17th U.S. Spiritist Symposium. This year, it will be on September 30th in Portland, Oregon. The symposium will focus on the topic of spiritual path to mental balance, and it has a full program including talks, panels, Q&A sessions, youth panel, kids and youth activities. It's a full day of activities. Please note registration is now open with special early bird fees. Take a look at the event program and register at www.spiritistsymposium.org. And on the screen, you may notice that there is a QR code. And if you want to help the United States Spirits Federation produce publications and achieve its goal to promote Spiritism to everyone, scan the code on screen for a donation. Now, back to you, Brian. It is so good to have you with us today. And together with everyone who's watching this live broadcast, I want to give you a very warm welcome. It is good to have you here to discuss a very, really interesting topic, right? Be perfect. Come again? How do I become that? So, anyways, before Brian has the microphone, I'm sure you are as eager as I am to hear from him. But let me introduce him for anyone who has not had the privilege to have met him previously. Brian Vosberg has been a spiritist speaker and presenter since 20 years, 2005, having spoken at centers in New Jersey, New York, and Florida, Georgia, right, as well as past spiritist symposia. And Brian actively advocates living the principles of the doctrine and living a moral life. Professionally, Brian is a licensed professional civil engineer and he works as a project administrator overseeing state roadway construction projects in the Tampa, Sarasota area of Florida. Please take this opportunity to send your questions during the presentation using the chat window. Brian will reserve time to address your comments, feedback, questions once he concludes his presentation. Brian, it's all yours now.
All right. Thank you so much. Um, as mentioned in my introduction, one of the reasons I picked this topic is like I do want to try to live a principled life. And one of the great tenets that I've seen within the Spiritist doctrine particularly in the 5 books of the codification, is a lot of these issues on ways that we can live our life better and how we can use the doctrine to create a new lifestyle based on the teachings of the spirits, from what Allan Kardec did. And then later on, once Chico Xavier and Divaldo Franco started coming in with all these wonderful books that just added to it, it really helped cement the idea of we do need to live a more moral life, a more principled life today, tomorrow, forever, because it not only improves ourselves, it improves our communities, improves our world, and it does a lot of great things to just improve the elevation of Earth. I know in the past there's been a lot of talk saying how we're transitioning from a world of trials and atonements or to a world of regeneration. I'm not going to go too much into that for this topic. Again, that's part of the reasons we would love for everyone to read the doctrine, because it does explain the progression of worlds and how we're trying to go from step 2 to step 3. So that's a positive step. To use a phrase for all the kids out there, the younger generation, Earth is about to level up. So within the doctrine itself, it has this triple aspect of Spiritism, and it has the 3 legs: the philosophy emphasized by the Spiritist doctrine, the religion by the Gospel according to Spiritism, and then science from the Medium's book. In most centers, when you're visiting, they're going to teach you primarily from the philosophy and the religion aspects. And then the science one is kind of reserved for people that have been there for many, many years. It's its own separate class. But it doesn't mean that you can't read it now. And because there's things in it, while it's geared towards people that have mediumistic abilities, there are still things in there that do teach you on how to live a better life. And even most centers with their own programs, they'll add to it and add different things to it. For example, don't eat red meat before before 24 hours in advance. No wine, no or alcohol, no smoking. Things that you would do for at least a period of time to purify your spirit. That alone kind of just gives an indication of saying like how to be perfect. And that's just doing it for 24 hours. But if you can extend that for 48 hours, a week, a month, and turn it into your life, you're well on your way to what I started with this topic of being perfect. And then like this is, but the fun part about this is we have a philosophy and we also have a religion side, and they all work hand in hand. All 3 legs of these 3 aspects of Spiritism all work together. They interact with each other. A lot of times, as outside of the Spiritist community, you see this big divide between religion, science, philosophy, or politics, that they kind of like hold each other, they kind of like intentionally separate themselves. Whereas one of the great things with the doctrine is it meshes. It pulls them all together. And thus they reinforce each other. Whereas saying something as simple as chicken noodle soup for the soul, popular book series, also a great remedy. We don't know why it's such a great remedy, but it is. Many, many years down the road, we're finding out that chicken broth is easy on the stomach and everything else. And you start doing these scientific things that corroborate something that has been true, but it has been to use a term, magical thing. Like, oh, you have an upset stomach, or you're not feeling well, we'll make you some chicken noodle soup. But then not knowing that there is things that back it up. And the doctrine comes in and kind of starts blending some of these things that have been disconnected for many, many years, and with no understanding that they actually do work together. And that we do see that through, especially on the spiritual side of things, that you will have reasons to do activities. I was having a conversation with another well-known presenter here. We were talking about, and I brought up the point on Newton's 3 laws of physics. You take those 3 laws of physics, being an engineer, that's kind of my life, but they do this where you have this activity of a body at rest will stay at rest until acted upon by an outside force. Okay, so take a phone, it just hangs there until I move it. But apply that to a spirit. A spirit will not do anything. They'll just sit there, it's at the same level all the time, unless it's acted upon by an outside force. Encouragement, pain, many of these other ideas out there to sit there and say, hey, if you would do this, this would be, especially for encouragement, a reward. It's like, hey, if you would to get up, make your bed, or everything else, treat others nicely, especially treating others nicely, because that's the golden rule. When you listen to that and apply that, you're nice to others, and it starts to go around, then people start being nice to you because you've made a positive impact. And that's that's part of the point of this topic, was be perfect, or at least try to be. If you can be perfect, others can try to be perfect. The progress of just elevating up improves everything around us. And this is where I was kind of taking this thing, is like, we do need to take the time to lift ourselves up. And going back to what I was saying with the physics, you apply that to a spirit, science term, to a spiritual term. It works. It interacts itself. Karma itself is one of those things, an equal and opposite reaction. That's one of the other laws of physics. I believe it's the second law. So you have these principles that we assume for science, materialistic things, not realizing they also apply spiritually. And with the power of the doctrine itself, we see that by acknowledging the spiritual side of humanity, this whole other realm, this whole other world, new frontier, we just barely scratched the surface of. Even with all the teachings in the doctrine today, we still are so far, we have barely scratched the surface. With all the teachings we have today, we're still learning so much more. And it will be a long time before we understand even more of the deeper meanings behind the power of the Spirit and how it impacts our day-to-day lives. But yet, we already have teachings and ways that we should be promoting ourselves to live a better life. So, of the 5 books of the codification, I saw in 4 of them, especially, that there are lots of topics and lots of things you can do to help train yourself and teach yourself how to be a better person. It's not limited to just these areas. Like, you got the Spirits book, primarily in part 3, when you got all the different moral laws. When you're sitting there talking about the law of destruction, the law of progress, the law of reproduction, all these different moral laws, and you see how by applying them morally in your day-to-day lives, every day, 24/7, 365, for the entire life, you see meaningful progress in not just your life, but in the community, in the world around you. Again, me being a civil engineer, this is something I see a lot of, particularly the law of destruction, as I have to tear things apart to make way for something better. I rip up part of a roadway, unfortunately, for a period of time that makes everyone unhappy. But I do, by the end of that time, once that road is built, it's wider, it's bigger, runs smoother, and people are happy about this new roadway, not realizing that people have put the effort in. Maybe it was only 2 lanes, now it's 4 lanes, or now it's maybe up to 8 lanes. Who knows? But we've improved it. We took part of it apart, we destroyed part of it, or maybe we took away the whole road. There's been times that's happened too. again, like a building. You tear down a small house to make way for a bigger house. Or we just here in Florida, we've had the hurricanes last year. They destroyed a home or damaged a home so much that the only thing to do is tear it down and build a new home. So we got rid of something that was insufficient, that was not perfect, and put something that was better, that had learned from its mistakes. That's one of the big things, especially for, again, civil engineering and construction. Things keep improving over time. There was many years ago, there was a bridge up in Tacoma, Washington, called the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. They built it and was fine, but it started to rock and sway, not realizing that because they made it so thin, so light, that the breeze, there was enough of a wind channeled through the Narrows that it picked up speed. And it was enough to turn this bridge, steel, concrete, and everything, and made it start to fly. It became a wing. Now, eventually the bridge shook itself apart and fell into the Narrows. But people learned from that mistake. And now bridges today don't do that. They're designed now from that point. Why do I bring it up? Again, being perfect. We keep learning from our mistakes. We learn, especially from mistakes. We learn what not to do, or maybe when we go too far. We took something and we went too far. I want to keep going back to this with the gospel according to Spiritism. Now, I don't limit that one to the whole, which is one section, because the whole book is very important for how to be perfect. Now, there is a chapter specifically titled Be Perfect. I was reading that when I was asked to do this lecture, and that's why it became the topic, and it is featured here in a few slides. But the whole book itself has a lot of great wisdom and readings on how to live yourself in a better life. And it's worth rereading. Even the old trick where you take the book, you open to a random page, and you read what's there. It's amazing this type of stuff you'll see in that short one-page read, brief read, and you'll see some wonderful wisdom contained in that. Then you go on to, again, I've already mentioned a little bit with the medium's book, and it's kind of sprinkled throughout. When I was redoing my research for this lecture, I was kind of like looking around, seeing like, okay, there are some things for prep, but it seems to be they're all sprinkled within. But the big takeaways was this, like, again, purifying the soul, purifying the self, and morally elevating the person. Not only does it add protection, spiritual protection to you, it increases your vibrational levels. It makes you more in tune with with the higher order spirits. And if you're in tune with your higher order spirits, that means you're better in tune with your guardian angel. You're better in tune to being inspired with better advice. And then we go on to heaven and hell. And this one had like two little sections in it. One of them was an odd one because it's the penal code. And I was like, penal code? This is punishments. But it's for the spirits. And it's like, I think, like 36 little sections that you just sit there and read. They're real quick. It doesn't take too long to read. But as you read through them, it shows what happens on a spiritual side. When you do something, when something happens, there's a consequence. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. And these things add up. And again, this is kind of like the system with karma, or there's another thing where you have like so many positives that cancel out so many negatives, and you want to have a net positive by the end of your life. And this penal code kind of helps illustrate that, because it sits there and says, like, well, you do these negatives, this is the thing that's going to bother your spirit's going to be hurt. And if you don't do these things, your spirit's going to be improved. And then he goes on in heaven and hell, especially when you go to part 2, because now you've got all the different types of spirits with all the communications, from the happy to the miserable to those having physical ailments, that would have, and like why they would come into this world without an arm, being a quadriplegic, or to be hit with a disease, kind of like what happened to Stephen Hawking, where he's kind of basically trapped inside his own body. These examples illustrate not only how our past lives have direct impacts on our current life now, and also will impact our future lives, which is a very powerful thought. Because most of the time we always think we have that phrase that's out there in the world, YOLO, you only live once. We know for a fact in the doctrine that that's not the case, that we have multiple lives, and it's in line with God's justice. And we prepare for the next life. So we want to do good on this life so that we do good and we have a better situation in the next life. Outside of the doctrine, this is brilliantly illustrated by the Spirit Emmanuel when he came in with his book 2,000 years ago, 50 years later, and then I think there's another third one in that series. I believe it's Hail Christ. When you read through those books, especially when you do the first two, because you see him as a senator, he doesn't live a very good life. I mean, well, good materialistically, but not very good spiritually. And then you go in 50 years later, and the roles are reversed. He's not very good materialistically, physically, but he's very good spiritually. You see the growth in just those two lifetimes. And he says, like it says, that was, as the second book was said, 50 years later. He died, comes back, and we see him again as a grown person 50 years after the events of 2,000 years ago. It's a very powerful book because you see one reincarnation to the next incarnation. You see the difference because he learned so much at the end of his life that transferred into his new life. And that's, again, another powerful thing of why we need to be perfect or try to be. Within the doctrine itself, we have these two teachings. We have this right here in chapter 6 of the gospel. O Spiritists, love one another. This is the first teaching. Educate yourselves. This is the second. Education is huge. We have another friend, and there's another common saying. It's a cliche one, but it works. Practice makes perfect. Because when you practice, you educate yourself, you refine yourself, you learn, and you find the impurities within something. Professional athletes practice this skill hundreds and hundreds of times to refine the movements, make things as perfect as possible. So like if you're like Tiger Woods hitting a ball, golf ball, he hits it consistently time after time. Or these basketball players, they're shooting free throws. They're shooting and they're dropping in them baskets time and time and time again. Or football, soccer players, they'll sit there and they'll kick for hours practicing their skills so that in the heat of a game, they can line up and they can do a shot and they know the ball's going to go where they want it to go because they practiced and they made themselves perfect. And it's also why they are the elite members of that organization. Why we follow professional sports is because these are the best of the best. They perfected themselves to a level that people want to see and be a part of that team or that game. So that's another inspiring part. Shouldn't we also try in our efforts to be perfect in our own way? I mean, ideally, we're talking here spiritually because that overall, we can also take this smaller scale. be a perfect father, perfect husband, perfect engineer, perfect nurse, perfect doctor, because you refine your skills and you make yourself better. And that's what we hear about these things, especially here in this first line here. Educate yourself in the second, then love each other. Because love is above all. Because you can educate yourself, but if you don't love others and share that around, what good is it? Paul's very good at illustrating this one. Because you could be the most spiritual person in the world, but if you don't share it with others, if you don't love it and demonstrate it to others, it's meaningless. So we have to put the two together. And then we have this other one here. This one's from the Spirits book. And it's just a way. It's in here. It doesn't explain being perfect at all, but it does explain a way that we can be perfect. Destroying materialism. And figure out that true interests lie within the soul, within ourselves, within the spirit. And then getting rid of the prejudices of caste, sex, color. Especially in today's world, there's a lot of divisions, all different types. And we got to realize that God created all of humanity, all of us, and the plants, the world, animals, the universe itself. God created it all. And we are all meant to work together. We're all meant to link and mesh. And it hurts us when we have these divisions, these prejudices. So there's a good starting point in realizing that the material is also temporary. Just like I do on my roads. I build a road. I don't build a road that's going to last 1,000,000 years. I build a road that lasts 15, 20, 50, 100 years. But they have time frames. They have limits. And realizing that once they hit their limit, they need to be replaced. And hopefully, in that time frame, there'll be something better. We could do things better. And the replacement bridge may be more environmentally friendly, may not be. It may be better for the environment. may allow for things to be like ships to pass under it. I've been on bridges that we had to elevate. We had to lift them up higher because they were a little too short for a port. They wanted to bring bigger boats in, so we had to lift the bridge higher to get a bigger cargo ship underneath it. So we have to learning from our mistakes. But going back to it, materialism. We have to realize that a lot of things in our life are temporary. Everything you see behind me is temporary. It will all be gone one day. So but the education, the knowledge, the wisdom, love, those are intangible. You don't hold on to love. You share love, you possess love. Wisdom, experience. Again, it's not a book. I mean, you can put reminders of it in your book to help remember it, but it is still yours. And you carry it with you. So going back to that first one, educate yourself. Find out ways to be better. We've got so many books out there on self-improvement. And it's true. We do need to work on self-improvement. But one area that we've been lacking for a while is spiritual side. Our spirit. And our morals. Our principles. We need to work with those and put that effort together to improve ourselves spiritually, morally, so that many of the things we see today start to disappear. Because we kind of act like children in many ways. But when you sit down, you plot it, and you think about it, and you apply moral principles, things like this to it, you start to see that maybe just an error in context, an error in presentation, or even something that was unknown at the time. By doing this thing, you're going to impact this thing. Kind of like a butterfly effect, as it were. But by sitting here, usually, again, roadways, traffic is a big one in this case. If you cut someone off, you make the person behind you really mad. But why did you cut them off? Was it because, who knows? Maybe are you on the way to the hospital because your loved one was hurt? You cutting someone off because you failed to pay attention to the GPS or your map, and you're like, oh, I'm going to miss my turn? Or are you just sitting there like too impatient and you got to be somewhere, and you're just zip, zip, zip all through traffic? Now, what happens if that happens to you? Do you think about why that person jumped in front of you? Or you just get mad? But what if you were to sit there and say, like, hey, that person could be late for work, or could have had a bad morning. Doesn't matter. We got to show love to that person. We got to care for that person and realize that there are days you may be the one cutting people off, and there may be days that you get cut off. You got to accept them. But you also have to accept them with grace, dignity, forgiveness, and definitely love. Maybe an inconvenience, maybe even a little dangerous. But you also have to be mindful of that other person. And just by doing that alone, of being mindful of the drivers on the roadway around you, for whatever reasons, some good, some bad, doesn't matter. If you're mindful of them and you're saying, hey, we're on these roads together, we actually have to work together as a team as we travel on these roads. And that's going right to our part of being perfect. We all say bad drivers, good drivers, and everything else. But still, you take that example and you apply that larger scale. If we can work together on a roadway, let people that need to go faster to get wherever they need to go, let them pass. Those that are coming up their exit, you get to their spot, you let people in, or as they are merging on from a roadway, or letting them off and everything else. We work together, less stress, less pain. And we also then we also mesh and we work together. And we start working towards that perfection that we want to see on these roadways. Or some of these things, like, for me, again, when I watch traffic and everything else, and again, being an engineer, basing it to be like water. Roadways are just flows of water. But we don't do this fire hose method of you just blast the cars through, because every car is going to get crushed. They're all going to smash up together just to get to wherever they need to go. We do it at a slower vein where we do water through a hose and it comes perfectly clear. In engineering terms, it's called laminar flow, but it's everything works together in a line. Everything is at equilibrium. Everything is it's right there. It's kind of like it's the organized version of it. And allows, while it's a slower rate, like it says, it's clear. So there's no bubbles, no nothing like that. So it works efficiently. And that's what we want what we want on the roadways. But that's also what the spirits want from us spiritually. So they want us to start working together cohesively instead of all this bubbles and churning and everything else. They want us to be this nice system that works together, that flows, that interacts seamlessly with each other. So, but going into the gospel section, the chapter on be perfect. So I just pulled a few little sections out of here. They were saying, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who persecute and slander you. If you love only those who love you, what reward will you have? True statement. Do not the publicans do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what are you doing that is more than what others do? Do not the pagans also do the same? Therefore, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, this is from the Bible. This is Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, 46 through 48. You sit here and read this. This is the beginning of this chapter, by number 1. We look at this and it's like, here, this is Jesus' teachings to us to go well outside of our family, our friends, our close-knit group, and expand outwards. Just like I was saying before with the roadways. Be mindful of other drivers. You have no idea who they are. You have no idea what their background is and their history is, but you do need to work with them because you're on the same roads together. Otherwise, you have an accident. We need to keep this up globally. It's one of the greatest things from a personal experience for me, being involved with this Spiritist community. I've had Marcia, who introduced me today, and many, many wonderful people from the Spiritist community. Many of them are Brazilians. They've opened me with open arms, and I've also felt this love between different cultures. Me growing up as an American, many of them as Brazilians, and we work and we mesh together to create this wonderful community together. And then to come to find out that for me at least, that this is also a very global group. There's Spiritists in France, Japan, Australia, all over the world. And it's great when the community always comes together. And I love that this shared moment that we work together, and even for this video, which is posted for the whole world to see, to come together and work cohesively. It's not easy to do, but it is an effort we should be making. Now we go into the teachings from the chapter. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Taken literally, would presuppose the possibility of attaining absolute perfection. Now, the doctrine itself, it kind of sits there and says, like, you can't do it in one lifetime. Over many, many millennia as a spirit, since the spirit itself is immortal, we should get maybe not absolute perfection, but we should get relative perfection. We'll get better. We get better over time. So the people that Jesus spoke to would not have understood this nuance. He limited himself to presenting them with the model and told them to put the effort to emulate it. This was 2,000 years ago. And Jesus gave us a wonderful example to follow, the emulation. And try to follow his words. We're still struggling with that to this day, but it's worth putting the effort in. The next section on this one here, again, I kind of truncated this up to make it simpler. Moral persons are those who practice the law of justice, love, and charity in its greatest purity. They live the golden rules. You know, that's the love your God, your Father with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. All of the laws on these two, all of the law is based on those two commandments. So you take those two and simplify it. Love God, and then love your neighbor as yourself. Treat your neighbor as yourself. We definitely need to work on this. Anything else in this conversation, put those two into practice. When you love God, you take yourself and you don't put yourself on top of the world. You humble yourself just by doing that alone. And then when you start loving each other, treat others as you want to be treated. It has a profound effect when you actually do that. When you sit back and think about it, do you want to treat your kids Are you like, when you treat your kids the same way you were treated as when you were a child? Did you like it when they did that or not? Or do you see the reasoning behind it? Why you had to be stern? Why your parents were stern to you, you had to be stern with your kids, and you found the reasonings for it? Or are you just sitting there being mad because you had a bad day and you're taking it out on them? Is that a good thing? Would you want someone that's mad when they're having a bad day, being mad and yelling at you and giving you the bad, all that things? And like, you're like, why are you yelling at me for? That's the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. Be mindful of your own actions, your own thoughts, and how those are. If you can perceive how they're going to be received by the other person, that's wonderful. But even just on the context of yourself, would you like talking to yourself in that frame of mind? If not, time to either sit back, relax, find a way to find your balance and calm, meditate, music, whatever you need to do to get yourself back in that spot. You're already starting to achieve your perfection. Going on here. Have faith in God and God's goodness, justice, and wisdom. In all circumstances, charity is their guide. Again, going on this part, don't keep it to yourself. Because this world, we are meant to be social. We are meant to expand out. And being perfect is not just be perfect individually. It's being perfect globally. So it expands out on the thought. So, and we have to work together. That's part of it. And part of it is when people are hurting, when people are in need, if you're able to, you should put an effort to help alleviate their sufferings. Even if it's a tiny little bit, you should definitely put the effort in. Hold no hatred or rancor, desire for vengeance. Huge. A lot of us, we hold resentment. We hold a lot of grudges. We hold this pain. It's usually, if it's from one person, we really don't like that other person back. But we got to let it go. Doesn't help them. Doesn't bother them at all. It hurts you. And again, it's going back to the Newton's laws of physics. If you're holding on all that negative emotions, how are you getting the positive? Because all then kind of like, are you kind of pushing away the positive? And so you're exuding that negative energy out again. You're holding that resentment. And so you kind of coming at like be like Scrooge, be like a miser, where you're sitting there and the only thing, this is it. You're holding too tightly on the only thing you've got that you care about, and everything else don't worry about. Well, maybe we need to rethink that and sit there and say, and let go of the vengeance. Let go. What does it do? What does it do? Does it improve the relations between you and that other person? Will it solve anything to continue to hold that resentment? What does it? I mean, literally, what does it solve? When you sit back and think about it, if you're the only one holding the resentment, what is it? What do you gain out of that? And then the last one here, indulgent toward others' weaknesses, and they recall these words of Christ, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Again, going back to the thing is reflect back. Are you blameless? Are you okay? Are you perfect? No? Then why harp on the imperfections of others? Why beat down something? You may have already beat this. You may have says, hey, I'm above this already. But if you're going to look down on them and basically kick them while they're down, yeah, you may have improved over here, but you're not improving over here. And we want to improve everywhere. One of the common topics that we mentioned within Spiritism is like, as if you were using the angel, you have two wings. And the first one is your moral wing, You have your intellectual wing. And you want them both to be strong together. If you're intellectually strong and morally weak, then you're going to drift. You're not going to fly perfectly. If you're morally strong, intellectually weak, it's great, but how can you help people? Because you need the intelligence to understand how you can best improve things. So there was always a desire to balance the two wings. And I'm going to wrap this up really quickly because we're about out of our time here. I focused mostly on the main doctrinal teachings, and I did touch a little bit outside of it. And we're talking about being perfect. And like I said, I brought here the manual series, again, highlighting 2,000 years ago and 50 years later. Also, Paul and Stephen was a really good book on how he changed his life around. We also have the Andre Luis series, which is also another fantastic chance to read through the series. And you can see the development of Andre Luis's spirit, and especially in the first book, NOSSOS. When you look through it and how he lived his life materialistically, it wasn't really very spiritual, but had that spiritual awakening. But after spending 8 years in the lower zones or umbral, he spent all that time wallowing in his own self-misery of his mind. But then once he was released, look at the greatness he did. And and we see it in his books. He continued to advance and grow. And we see that, and then as he's able to help others, and even like with NOSSOS, he had an opportunity to help his family when he realized that he had been replaced and there was another man there taking care of his kids, his wife, because he died already. And then he's on his deathbed and he can see his wife crying and struggling because she can't bear to be a widow again. Please. Andre Luis says, like, he got rid of, again, the vengeance, everything else. He shed off a lot of the whatever he was harboring, and he says, no, I'm helping her. This guy stepped in after I left, and he's taking care of my family for me. He is my brother. I do not know him, but I will take care of him. And he goes and he calls for help and says, hey, help this person. And he gets this help, helps relieve this person up. And that's how he got, at least in this book, how he became a citizen in NOSSOS. And that's the sign of the perfection. That's an example that when we grow and be more perfect spiritually, we can see how, just through the examples of these books, how we continue to grow. And then I had to throw one out here to our good friend, Dan Assisi, our center here in Florida. We've been dissecting his book, Our Road to Damascus. And we're doing a lecture series on the different points of his lessons. And it's also, and I bring it up again here in this one here, because it's like when you do that Damascus moment and you sit there and you think about it, how it allows you to make changes in your life, positive changes, reinforcement changes. You approach that sign of being perfect. You put yourself on a path to perfection. It's not going to be easy, but it is life-changing, just as this road to Damascus. When you think about what Paul went through on that moment and how his life changed completely and how he became a force for good and literally ended up writing a good portion of the New Testament of the Bible, all the epistles are through Paul. So he put a lot of effort in, and he did so much just from that one moment, and he changed his life for the better because of it. Thank you so much for letting me speak, and I'm going to open the floor up for the questions.
Thank you so much, Brian, and we really appreciate all the insights about this topic that you provided, and we're open for comments and questions from the audience. So let's see if we have any already that we can start talking. So, Brian, in a world of frantic activity and constant distractions, aka entertainment, it can be hard to identify what we need to embrace to lead a moral life. How can we establish a stronger connection with God and lead this richer spiritual life that you refer to?
I mean, good part is definitely, again, joining a spiritist community near you. There's one big part to it, but it's not the only one. When you have all these places of worship, places of faith, and where you have, or in these other places where you're able to open up and have the dialogue, because this is the most important part, is the ability to talk to people about these things. Big issue we have today is this block of conversation. We do need to have these conversations, and they're difficult. They're hard. This is not easy stuff, because this is again, we're leveling up. This is next level. So we do need to make efforts to learn how to understand how we can be better. And sometimes it is like getting away from the entertainment. I mean, some things you can find in entertainment, you can find little nuggets. But then for the most part, we do need to pull ourselves out of it, read a book. I've mentioned several today. Sit down, read a book, focus your mind, meditate, everything else. But definitely try to get involved with your community, especially find one that's like-minded if you can.
That's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's not about this or that religious group, right? It's about what you need to do to bring the sacred within, the God
Yes.
within that we all have. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you, Brian. We have another question, and this one says, as we know, the Spiritist body of work aims at the moral transformation of all of us. How does the religious aspect of Spiritism address the moral consequences of human behavior defined by the use of our free will? Oh, that's a big one, huh, Brian?
Yes, it
And I
is.
think it's referencing your triangle with Spiritism has, right?
Yes.
Religion, philosophy, and science. But within the religious component, how do we address those moral consequences of our behavior?
I mean, when you look at most times when we're talking moral life and the religious, we kind of start thinking like the 10 Commandments, the Golden Rule, as I mentioned later on in the presentation. So we already have some of those things in there, but then part of it also is when you put things in place that help bring yourself in tune with God. Whenever you have spiritist meetings typically begin and end with a prayer. When you do gospel in the home, you start and end with a prayer. And not only that, is the gospel of the home itself refocuses you on bringing the religion into your home and into your life. So that's another one that would be a good key to bring something, the religious aspect in. It's like, even if you sit there and you read a chapter of the book and discuss it amongst your family members, that helps bring the religious aspects in. But even if you're not in the Spiritist community and you're going to church, synagogue, mosque, when you go to those places, they have their traditions and religion things in there to help bring you up spiritually. And you can take those things and still bring them in. Prayer is a huge one. But there may be other things you can do within, like the Jewish community with the Passover Seder that they hold every year. There's a lot of tradition and things to it, but they use it as a reminder of what they went through, what the ancient Jews went through in the book of Exodus. So there's things like that that you can always bring into play. I'm going to keep this one kind of short.
Can I ask to put the question back, because I think the person who provided the question, I don't know if you can do that.
A follow-up?
Well, yeah, because they talked about actual very pragmatic view, right? We all have our free will. We all have our ability to exercise our decisions and selections, and even how do we handle our own frustration, right, Brian? And
yes.
As such, we do have a certain behavior. When I love what you talked so much about the roads, because the roads being in the middle of traffic really embraces that idea that you're no longer an individual, you're part of a larger collective system, if you will. And as such,
Mm-hmm.
everything I do, including go too slow, right? Be too cautious, and everybody now has to be slower, etc., etc. So every decision has a consequence. But how do we do this? How does it, what does it mean, this exercise of my freedom or my free will impact that idea of moral transformation? I want to be a better person. I think St. Augustine is a great example, right, of
Yes.
that, of somebody who lived a, or Paul for that matter, in the book
Mm-hmm.
that you referenced. So our Damascus moments may be one that you recognize, whoops, I've exercised my free will, yes, but look at the consequences of those decisions. Maybe you want to talk about it if you have a minute.
Yeah, because I guess I can stick with the road analogy too, because if it does, it has that way of blending with everybody, and because it says it's no longer just you, it's others, and like it says, in a system. And you have people that will do, like, there's people like an elderly couple typically run slower because their eyesight gets worse and everything else. Their reaction time is less. So they're driving at what they believe is safe for them. May not be safe for you, me, and others, but it's safe for them. And we do need to keep that in mind. Yeah, it may be an inconvenience to us, but would you rather you be inconvenienced and they stay alive versus them kind of being forced by other people to accelerate and go with the flow of traffic to be better for everyone else? I mean, there's a consequence to that. And when, like,
Mhm.
we kind of force people to do things that they're not ready to do, or the other one too is free will. I see this a lot with motorcyclists. They will zip zag around and they will haul. They will go
Yes.
100 miles an hour through up zip zagging through things, but eventually they may not. They'll hit that spot. I unfortunately saw this in one of my drives. A motorcyclist thought he could outrun the cops, flew up the shoulder, and ended up in the back window of a car that was coming on from an on ramp. And they just pulled in so quick that they couldn't react, and they were in the back window of that person's car. Ruined his day, ruined that other person's day. So not just, again, consequence. This person thought he could outrun the cops, and like I said, he ended up in the back windshield of a car, and that person now has had to get a new windshield put in the back of their car. Their day was inconvenience and everything else through no fault of their own. So this one person's free will impacted others. And this is something
Right.
we also have to keep in mind when you have these moral consequences, is it may not impact just you. It could impact others.
Love it. Love it. Hi, Kirsten. Kirsten's saying, great point, Brian. Joanna De Angelis says we shouldn't push people to face themselves if they don't first have the resources to deal with their own shadow. And that's a very great point, right, Kirsten and all.
Mhm.
We live, we're immersed in this collective society, but we cannot push someone else to be ready to face a perfection, and I put in air quotes here because the idea of being perfect is relative, is not absolute, right?
Mhm.
Oh, great, Kirsten, thank you. We just watched a docu-series on Netflix called Arnold, about Arnold
Ooh.
Schwarzenegger's life, and it's amazing because it shows how disciplined he was to try and be successful, and he was, but he acknowledged that he failed in the area of his marriage to Maria. It feels like it's easier to master the exterior, or is that just lack of knowledge to go within ourselves? What are your thoughts, Brian?
Ooh. It, both, like, definitely it's easier to master the exterior because you can see it. When you have your five
Mhm.
senses engaged, it's easier to focus on the physical. Whereas it's very difficult to focus on the internal because it's you can't see it and everything else. It's mostly through feel, and through thought. So it's heart and mind connection to put the two together. And again, this is something else too that we've been lacking the lack of knowledge to go within ourselves is we don't push in today's society. We really don't reflect on spiritual matters, our values, our principles. We seem to be very, again, using Kristen's thing here, we're very exteriorly focused, not realizing that those things have an interior focus. And it is, again, going back to the thing, it was one of those things that always attracted me with the doctrine is the doctrine itself focused me to reflect inwards. You mentioned St. Augustine with this famous line, "Know thyself."
Yes.
And this, I didn't hear that before until I got into the doctrine. And it's something that is not discussed a lot. I wish it was. I wish the churches, synagogues, mosques, all the different religions around the world. I mean, the Buddhists are pretty good at doing the internal reflection from what I've seen, especially the Tibetan monks. They're very good on the internal reflection. But it seems to me it's not a overall broad thing. And it is something that we need to do more of, is try to promote that inward reflection more often and take these moments to sit there and reflect on these things. Especially, it was one of the funny things with movies, since we're bringing up Arnold here, is when you look at some of these good movies or some of these very memorable movies, one of the things that we always talk about is how to bring that around. Is when you see a movie, how does it reflect back to you? Recently, like we're seeing, Avatar: Way of Water just came out recently, and it was interesting to see that because it's in one scene here. Hopefully, I'm not spoiling it for anybody out there. It's kind of noticed in one of the trailers, so I think I'm safe. But it was, he loses a son, but adopts another as his own, and that is powerful in and of itself. And not only that, the son is the son of the guy that was trying to kill him, that was hurting him. And he adopted his son. And this guy's son, and that guy also even killed his own son. So that there was, within that pain and agony, he's doing that release. And it was something just to see in one movie, just to see that come in there. And you can go reflect on many of these other great movies, things that we call classics. Many of them have a moral component to them, and that you can sit there and reflect back on. And that's what makes them great and makes them rewatchable, especially, is because the morals are in there.
Yes.
And it gives you that chance to reflect. So thank you, Kristen, for bringing that one back up.
Yes, thank you, Kristen. I wanted to bring something else before we go to our next question, which is listening to a very dear friend of mine who is an educator, right? A writer, a spiritist. And she was reminding me that the word education, I know you talked about education previously in our talk today, Brian, but she mentioned education comes from actually two very similar words in Latin, educare and educere, with an E-R-E and A-R-E. And with an A, it really means to educate whomever from outside in. So we educate ourselves by listening, by maybe looking at an example, or even the laws or reprimands or limitations. But the education from Latin, ERE, really, it's all beautifully said by St. Augustine, right? Bringing an education from inside out, right? So it's that self-education, the idea that when we look within, we have all that we need to learn, all those processes, and it's up to us to understand, is this part of what I can now enact? How can I, as Kristen alluded earlier from Joanna D'Angela's teachings, right? Am I ready to be able to learn for myself, by the way, but am I ready to be perfect, because I already have that framework? So really good insights there. But let's see if we have another question. Brian, I think we may have time for one or two more.
Okay.
So, Brian, could you describe the materialistic and spiritual dimensions of the quote unquote perfect man according to
Ooh.
Spiritism? I think
I
you had
was
a slide, right? But I
I
think
had a
we're talking
slide on it,
about.
and I enjoy it, and I had to really condense it down.
Yes,
It was because there is the chapter on Be Perfect in the Gospel According to Spiritism. It was a page long written, and I just had to pick only a few things to fit on a slide. There's a
sure.
lot more to that, and
Hmm.
and it's like, but on the materialistic side too, we also have to remember that like our bodies, ourselves, our human bodies is a gift from God. We were granted with that creation. So on a materialistic side, we do need to take good care of ourselves, using science and everything else. We do need to understand what is great for our bodies and everything else. If we have to work out, do a little some exercise to lose the belly and everything else, that's part of it, because we are responsible also on the materialistic side to take care of our physical bodies. So we shouldn't be, and this was illustrated especially wonderfully through the NOSSOS series, where we see all the people that were considered suicides, and I died of an old age. And it's like, yeah, but you could have lived 5-10 years longer if you didn't drink, smoke, all kinds of different things. So you have those things that,
Excessively, especially, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And like I says, and then and bear in mind too that the materialistic and the spiritual are linked through our paraspirit. So
Yes.
what happens on one side impacts the other, and vice versa. So when you have a spiritual imbalance, it'll impact in that you'll be more prone to sickness and everything else, and then things like this. And then same way also that when you do things materialistically, drinking or some of the other excesses, the vices, it impacts your spirit. So the two work with each other. So there's really no separation, as in the question it kind of mentions the materialistic and spiritual. Remember, they're blended.
Awesome.
They're linked
Yeah.
together through our paraspirit.
Yeah. No, beautifully said. I wanted to take a moment. If you don't know, right? If there's a lot of books and a lot of names that were given here, and just by way of explanation, right, Brian? We started with Allan Kardec, the
Mm-hmm.
codifier of Spiritism body of work. Through what we call the basic, the five. There are many more books, but five books
Mm-hmm.
that are the basic ones for us to see. We also talked about, I remember you saying Chico Xavier, who is a Brazilian medium, very prolific. And through Chico's mediumship, we have now Emmanuel as a spiritual author, right? And you also mentioned Andre Luis that wrote the series, Andre Luis series, including Nossolar that you mentioned here. And then we have Divaldo Pereira Franco, who's another Brazilian medium who is very well linked, at least to me, as a student of Joanna de Angelis, right? He is that medium that transcribed the incorporation with that very strong cooperation
Mm-hmm.
with Joanna de Angelis on the psychological series. So lots and lots and lots of information for all of you who may be interested in this topic at large, right? It's not just you read a page and you become perfect. It's we are perfecting ourselves, and there's many great material for us to better understand. But let's
Mm-hmm.
see if we have another question. In an individualistic society, the idea of love in a collective system, so it's back to the traffic, right? In a collective system,
Yeah.
is hard to understand. What is love, Brian? And how is love understood in the paradigm of imperfect beings that you and I and everybody else here are trying to be perfect?
Ooh, this is a tough one. Kudos to whoever submitted this one in, because again, love for is far exceeds far more than respect. But it is that, let's just simplify it to respect. And you sit there and talk about it. It's like, I respect you. You have a right to live. You have a right to do your things and do what you want to do. And I want you to respect me. Again, kind of like the golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. And since you're showing that person respect, you also want to sit there and say, hey, you have this plot of land. This is your home. I don't want to impinge on that. I want to have my home nearby, and I don't want us to clash. I don't want us to fight. And then as more and more people come in, then you start adding to it. And it's this collective system of, I'm just using respect and replacing the word love. And then you can use that within a relationship, that you respect your spouse, that they are a person. They are a spirit too, totally different from you, but yet you have enough connection, you have enough mutual respect for each other that you can cohabitate, and you can raise children and show them respect, and they're supposed to respect you too. So again, I'm kind of just only changing the word love to respect, but in some cases that might be enough to trigger, especially when this second half of this question here, how is love understood in the paradigm of imperfect beings trying to be perfect? It's like, if you can respect the other person and let them be, that they have a right to exist too, whether you're perfect or not, it kind of washes out in that part. But it does, like, the fact that you are acknowledging them is a huge sign right there. Because a lot of the conflicts and wars and things we see throughout history has been this thing of lack of respect, that we don't respect them. But why the Romans were conquering the barbarians, they thought they were less than human. They were animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So hopefully
That is
and
awesome.
unfortunately, I have to kind of keep it a little bit on the surface here.
No,
But it
it's
is
okay.
again,
In jest, I want to say the first thing that comes to my mind was Tina Turner. What love got to do with it, right? And then I move on to think about Voltaire, because Voltaire talks about that line of respect, right? Your you can only your freedom ends when the freedom of the other starts. So that's the sign of my freedom should not destroy the other just because I am free to do something. But then the third person individual at that came to my mind, Brian, was Jesus, right? Jesus, if you think about it, he
mhm,
brought not only this notion, and I'm thinking like, Jesus, come on, be perfect, but he also mentioned love your enemy, right? And which is
mhm,
a bold statement. And I think Joseph Campbell, in his work in comparative religions as a theologian, he talks about that Jesus was this most revolutionary aspect of Jesus is the fact that he said exactly that, right? He's in the first time in the history of mankind that we talk about love your neighbor. And from that perspective, Jesus did not ask me to put myself in a position of danger and threat to myself by kissing and hugging and being so loving to somebody who wants to hurt me. It's different, but I think you did quite well. It's respect, it's understanding our boundaries, it's allowing that person, that other individual that may not think or behave or believe in things like I do, yet he or she's deserving of my love, my respect. So I think we have time for one more question, I believe. What does Jesus ask us regarding, oh, there we go, love and tolerance? Are we expected to be perfect and be able to offer unconditional love and absolute tolerance? What are your thoughts?
uh, definitely not on the absolute tolerance, because we can't
Mhm.
tolerate everything. Because then again, that's where do you lie? Then you kind of like, you're just basically rolling over and being used and abused by everyone around you. So like it says, you have to have your space, your place, and everything else. You have your part to play. You're just as vital as everyone else in this world. And the idea is like, we've been using roadways and cars and everything else. But I was like when you look at a car, how, especially when you got these like precision cars, the higher end ones, they work perfectly when everything is aligned and working in this precision. And that's perfection in many ways, like a materialistic interpretation of perfection.
Yes.
And when you got, but then you have things that are a little sloppier and everything else. They're efficient, they work, but they don't work as well. And you can see this. I was saying, like, typically, like, Jeeps post World War II were meant to be, you can just take apart and just throw it in and get it back on the road. So it would work, but it wouldn't be a Ferrari or a Lamborghini that would just, or a BMW that just, it would work, but not as efficiently. And as we work towards perfection, we improve the efficiency of the whole world improves. And you do see this, like I said, when you do apply these practices in small scale, you definitely see it. Like when you treat your family with respect, everybody seems to work together and everything, and more harmoniously. Like then just the Spiritist communities, when I go to the centers and you see everyone that works, they have their spots, they have their little stations, they work together, they hug, they embrace, they say hi and share. It's great. And you see this combination, and it works so well when like if someone can't be there today, other people step up and take over. That they work, and you just see that they do, and it has this harmony to it, where even if a person can't be there anymore, someone will come in and take over, or they'll sit there and say, okay, we can't do this anymore, and they adapt and adjust, but it does work together. And this is what Jesus is pushing for, is he wants the whole world to come together as brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
And that's why he didn't go. He didn't stick to the Jews. He went to the Gentiles, and he was like, he's bringing them all together. So
Absolutely. This is awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I think all Christian says that love is something magically mysterious. The reality is, thank God, we just need to begin wherever we are. Beautiful, Christian. We don't have to understand immense complexities. We are imperfect, and God knows that and loves us anyways. He just wants us to do our very best. That is love. Loving someone where they are. Thank you. Beautifully said. Thank you so much,
yes,
Kirsten. With that, I think we have come to a close, Brian. I want to say thank you. This has been an amazing talk. I really appreciate the time together. And I wanted to say not only thank you, but thank you everyone who has been with us today watching this live talk. And for those who are also following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. Next Saturday, June 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern, don't miss our next live with Andrea Marshall Neto, sorry. And she'll be discussing what good is the study of Spiritism after all. Love it, love the title. Don't miss. And Brian, before we close, would you be so kind to say a prayer for us?
absolutely.
Thank you.
Dear Lord, wonderful Master, mentors of us all, watch over us now as we part company. Let us take this time to absorb and understand that which was presented here today. Let it guide us and help us to take a path that brings us closer to your light and your love. Let us go forth from here now, energized and rejuvenated, that we may also be a light to others in our day-to-day lives, inspiring them to be better, to be that much closer to perfection. Let us reach out our hands in love and fraternity to those that need it and help them on their path, even if it is for only a short while. Continue to look down on us and guide us and inspire us as we progress through our day-to-day lives, so that we may be brought to your light that so much faster. Continue to watch over us all, no matter where we are. Amen.